We're going to continue this his and her theme. We're going to talk about it in reference to print media, especially early on. So there's this differentiation between his print media and her print media, as you can imagine. This is the first time I've heard it referred to as lad lit versus chick lit, but I guess that makes sense. Novels and masculinity don't seem to go together. Many boys associate reading with femininity, so boys don't read. Now, boys might read up until they start to transition from being boys to men. But once they start going through gender policing in middle school and high school, they come away less likely to read. But if they're going to read, they're going to read men's magazines like Maxim and Men's Health, Sports Illustrated, where they accentuate the masculine physique to be a man, to be a stereotypical man who's strong, big, bulky, treats women in a certain way. And of course, the magazines themselves represent women in a very sexualized, hypersexualized perspective. Of course, there's hers, chick lit, where women are presented as befuddled modern women, kind of stumbling through the new world of work, and magazines like Cosmo and Red Book that construct women as weak and passive, which is very much in line with the traditional male female gender stereotypes. So Maxim and Sports Illustrated are emphasizing men as masculine and in many respects hypermasculine, and what we find in Red Book and Cosmo is women presented as weak and passive. This is old hat for us gender construction folks these days. We know the game that they're playing, and the game is being played out in our media as in many other socializing institutions. One of the newer realms of media consumption is video games. We are a long way away from Pong. I remember Pong when Pong came out. Things like Asteroids and Space Invaders. These were very, very simple video games that still couldn't quite conceptualize human forms in and of themselves, were blocky and certainly not the representations we see in video games today, where once again, hyper-masculinized men, hyper-sexualized females, and following along the lines of their gender roles in society. The average gamer is male and about 33 years old, even though women are coming into video games. They're entering the market by leaps and bounds. But overall, average teenage boys are the biggest consumers. They're playing about 13 hours a week versus average teenage girls playing about 5 hours a week. Sports and adventure games are 95% males are playing those. Characters, as I mentioned, are almost always exaggerated gender stereotypes. Males with torn t-shirts, army fatigues, and large biceps, where females are large-breasted, small-waisted, always having bedroom hair and hypersexualized. You find this in video game after video game after video game. Very rarely do you see a woman or a man that is anywhere close to being what we are in the real world. Another major industry, probably the biggest industry, which says something about our society and about the human condition in and of itself, is pornography. They are making about $10 to $14 billion annual selling pornography. More than 200 videos are produced per week. And we're also seeing, once again, women penetrating what has historically been seen as all male environment. So women are beginning to increase their consumption of pornography as we move through the 21st century. We've seen an increase in adult bookstores, which is kind of counterintuitive, thinking that you have so much porn available on the internet. You would think that the adult bookstore would be falling to the wayside, but that's not the case. Adult entertainment stores outnumber McDonald's restaurants 3-1 these days. Of course, we're seeing an increase in access to porn on the internet. Of the 1,000 most popular internet sites visited annually, 100 of them are porn sites. So 10% of all of the top visited sites are porn sites. Of course, porn has made its way into popular culture, and even when we're not seeing pornographic scenes like we would think of with Hustler magazine or Penthouse or Swank or whatever names, Beaver Hunt, that used to be out there for consumption, what we are also seeing is that the normal media that we consume has become sexualized in ways that was never foreseen in the 1950s and 1960s. The Mary Tyler Moore Show, the Dick Van Dyke Show, whenever they had bedroom scenes, they either had separate beds or they were clearly separated, but not today. Most of our youth are consuming images and scenes of sex on primetime TV that would have been seen as pornographic in the past. But with that said, what we're starting to see, even though we've talked a lot about his and her media, the gender differences are becoming smaller, but they're still consequential. Even though we're seeing a convergence and an overall equality in the consumption of social media, of videos, video games, we're still seeing some differences. We know men and women use media differently, but we also know that their use is converging. The most glaring place where this is happening is sports. Sports used to be primarily a man's domain, but we now see 50% of the population in the United States, 50% of the women's population in the United States consume sports just as much as men do. We also see this in relationship to the technology itself. iPods, the internet, Android devices, the technology world in and of itself is being equally consumed by men and women. What we now see is that men are only slightly more likely to use the internet than women, and this was not the case historically. And as we get older and media becomes more prevalent in our lives, you can only expect the numbers for women consuming this type of media to marry up with those of men. As I mentioned, there is some convergence, but we can clearly see that men and women go to the internet and use these technologies for different things. Women are more likely to communicate through these forms of technology. They're more likely to email, text, call, communicate in their networks. Men are more likely to be more task-oriented, paying their bills, shopping online, not really trying to communicate with others, even though they might communicate some, but it's not their primary use of the technology. They might be going out to consume something, watch a video, play a game, but not necessarily communicate. But one of the places we find our biggest differences is not the why and the where and the how of the media. It's essentially what we think when we use the media. Time after time, study after study shows that women are less likely to see themselves as experts in the realm of the use of media and technology. As a matter of fact, they said in the textbook, you've never heard a woman say she was an expert, and you've never heard a man say he was a novice. So women tend to self-deprecate, whereas men tend to exaggerate their proficiencies with the technology. And in the end, women's increasing equality comes at a steep price in the world, marked less and less by gender difference, but still marked by gender inequality. Women can enter men's fields, but then they are on men's turfs and must play by the men's rules. Gender equality in the media world will come not when gender difference disappears, but when gender inequality disappears. So, just as when women enter men's fields in the workplace or in education or in the professions, if they succeed too well, then they can be seen as insufficiently feminine, have their sexuality called into question, and risk not getting taken seriously as women. But if they fail, they are seen as very feminine women, demonstrating that inequality is really the result of difference, not its cause. Gender equality in the virtual world of the media, just like the real world, will not just disappear because we want it to.